Hello and welcome to Sage Advice. I will be your guest host, Davi Santos, and I'm here with renowned acting teacher, Rita Litton. Hello, Rita.
Hello.
Yes,
Great to be here.
so happy to have you. Rita was my own acting teacher back when I was 16 years old, and I will say revolutionized my technique, and I will say why very shortly. But first, a quick intro. Rita has actually launched the first and original on-camera teen acting class in 1978 before everyone else, and has taught thousands of students, has been named top 3 favorite acting teacher on Backstage magazine. She is press in Variety, the New York Times, everything and everywhere, and has also served as a casting consultant over at practically every studio, from Fox to Disney to 20th Century, everywhere. So Rita, your experience has really surmounted the industry and has also served so many different students over the ages. But you began within yourself with UCLA and regional theater and classical theater, Shakespeare. So if we can jump to the very humble beginnings, how did we evolve from from the beginning? In fact,
I had a great acting. I was thinking about that because I didn't see my first play till I was 14. Although I think I announced early on that I thought I'd be an actress. One of those. I did a lot of make believe, but I had a great drama teacher, and I was in a huge public school system in Los Angeles, and theater really saved me. I would have kind of got lost in the shuffle, I think, but it gave me an opportunity to stand out. And she didn't give acting classes as much as she cast me in productions, but she revolutionized a lot of what I thought. The first show I ever saw was superb. It was at probably the Amundsen Theater, and it was an acting company starring Eva Le Gallienne, and she had done a production of Girardot's Mad Woman of Chaillot. And everybody was involved. Every little bit player. I don't know if you know the story, but the rich people are taking over the world. It's a wonderful show to revise. But sure enough, then later on my senior year, I was cast in that role, and she would bring in music and pictures, and she'd say, "This is what your character's like." And she pulled all these things, and she did a lot for my confidence as well. So I think sometimes, it's ironic. She told me to get into television and film, but at the time I was like, why not theater? But she was kind of a seer about maybe knowing where I was headed, which surprisingly ended up being theater as well as, or teaching as well as performing. But you want some more specifics of who was instrumental?
Well, would you say that she served as a mentor?
Oh, she's a wonderful mentor. And she took someone who was very tall for her age and very gawky. And, she'd call me a hoyden, and I'd have to go look it up. And that was a tomboy. And I was like, I'm not a tomboy, but great that somebody thinks so. It's important to me with my own students, I think, that they grow as people. Some of them, I'm gratified how successful they've become. But I also am really proud of the students that blossomed as individuals, whether it's confidence or poise, or that this age group that I ended up selecting I'm really fond of that age. Even as I work with adults and sometimes younger children, the transitional period of teenagers it's really exciting to see not only the physical changes, but how they mature as people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was instrumental. I always thought if I got an award, I would thank her. So it's ironic. But I've had other. Then you mentioned some of my background. I went to UCLA and I was in an acting specialization program, but I wasn't getting enough training. Really, it was in transition, and I saw the young actress who was getting all the leads on stage. So I hit her up after a rehearsal. And I said, how did you learn to do this? And she said, I went to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, and she trained there. And subsequently, I took their summer program on that advice, met a speech and voice teacher there who was going to make her own transition from ACT to a American-based Royal Shakespeare, Royal Academy of Dramatic Art program in Michigan. So that 2 years was sort of like the acting company. It gave me all kinds of training I didn't know existed, and this sort of the last maybe 6 months of the last year, we toured all around Michigan. So it was a very good preparation for what was to come, I think, which was moving to New York and trying to get regional theater.
Yeah. Once you went to New York with all of your classical and stage background, you also found yourself at the renowned acting studio, and you you sat in with perhaps the most famous acting teacher in American history, Lee Strasberg. And
I know, he was still alive then. I met a playwright and he said, you won't get in by auditioning. He said, they don't know you. They have to learn to know you. So his advice was to intern. And he said, we need a coordinator for the playwrights division. What's not to like? That was very exciting. So I did that. And he said, and as a result, you can audit the acting classes. So I did. I sat in, and Strasberg was a surprise because I'd had other teachers, but I'd heard about the method. I saw some of his classes. I saw a lot of slow process work, but then he would do something very technical. I remember there was a play young gentleman, well, a very established actor was working on, and he was playing Hitler. And he said, you don't have the military bearing. You're not holding yourself. And, he got into the externals, which I was surprised at. So I thought, every teacher sometimes reevaluates even their own process. If you're a good teacher, you continue to evolve. So I saw Strasberg, I saw Ellen Parsons, I saw Arthur Penn, not to mention all the famous actors that were floating in and out doing work. I saw Estelle Parsons act. I saw her do a very intimate scene dealing with her own body insecurities. It was fascinating, but I also think that I had one of the key teachers I'd had was at UCLA right before I left, and that was a fluke. But I took a teacher who had worked personally with Sanford Meisner, and I worked on Meisner technique for about a half a year, and I was astounded at what I wasn't doing, like really listening and catching all the nuance. And every student in that class had what I call an aha moment where they were caught. And I've read books and I've looked at some of the teachings of some other disciples, and I sort of have not always liked what I've read. But to me, that process of really reacting and being reactive, responsive to your partner was key. So I think of all the teachers I've had, and I've had a lot of good ones who challenged me. That process is one I've utilized a lot in my own teaching, I think.
Curious, of course, Meisner is almost, you can argue, is like the opposite end of the spectrum in approach than Strasberg, who's very mental and maybe personal and internalizing, introspective, whereas Meisner is all about just like, let's just throw all that away and be present and then see what happens as a result. So
it's a balance, isn't it?
And it seems like you have brought both of those worlds together. And as you said, good technique comes from the evolution of basically style, and also understanding these different techniques and where they come into place. And such as the example, as you said, the physicality of the.
It's so exciting to me when I work with students, because each time I try, my favorite class right now is doing a film and scene study class. And I can have the same student multiple semesters. I can have a brand new student. I'm always discovering new ways to approach them, but I always tell my students, I think I'm of the mutt or the runt school of acting. I take a little bit of everybody, but I haven't said, oh, it's the Rita Litton method, but I think it is. Early on, I set some goals that I wanted, and actual kind of assignments, right? I remember a student years ago booked his first film, and he went, and it was because you gave me homework. I said, yeah, I did. But without being too technical, you can ask yourself certain questions as an actor, and it's how maybe it's the hanger that will support your performance. But I think actors can over intellectualize. And I always said, these are just the raw beginnings. You know, what are you doing? What do you want? Why can't you get it? How will you get it? And the how was always to me a little more intriguing, a little more crucial, because I've always said the best actors make the best choices. So how you pursue what you want, how you maneuver or manipulate people or avoid them is kind of an insight into who you are as an actor and what your choices are. I guess how intuitive, how empathetic you are. But then the other things I would add would be, you know, simple things that sometimes get forgotten, like where are you? You know, it doesn't always matter where you are, but it might affect the conversation you're having, your ability to be loud if you're in a library, certain sensory things you can pull on in your environment, the relationship. But I think the one that I've used a lot lately is still what I call the event, and it has to do with what past situation, what past event might influence the scene at hand. And if you have a script, you can look at it. Although I've been working many scenes right now with an adult actress, and the past events aren't in the script, but they're alluded to. And so it's called You Can Count on Me. And it was a Lori Linney film that she did with Mark Ruffalo. Very good brother-sister relationship. And they talk a lot about the past, but not too many flashbacks, maybe one early on. Anyway, improvising some events. So she has some background about this. Being able to tell me about a moment that's key in, say, a parental disagreement when you're doing a scene later between two teenage siblings. I don't want to complicate it, but I think you do all that background and you know it a little or a lot, depending on how important it is. And then you try to get in the moment and sort of set it aside.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I also think that actors need to sometimes be specific. Well, should I keep going?
Please, yeah, no, go ahead, please,
Okay.
please.
I think on camera, okay, let's talk about camera work. Actors seem to be afraid to break this eye contact with their partners. And many times it's because they've worked elsewhere and they've been told, no, it's all about the other person. You have to stay on them. And I say, yeah, but we don't always in real life. You know, we are distracted, or we're doing three things, or we can't remember where we put our coffee mug. Oh, wait a minute, let me get it. And okay, now I've got it. I can go on. Or I'm remembering something. You know, the hugest, I think, asset an actor has on camera is the ability to call up a memory and make us wonder what you're thinking or what you're debating. And actors are afraid to do that. And they have to, because that's where everyone leans in and says, oh, what's going on? You know, look at the layers he's bringing to this bit of dialogue. Everything, I think, is dependent upon the situation, but that's something I've noticed a lot lately by working with students who've trained elsewhere. And I think you can get kind of hung up with your own internal workings if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm. You the actual activity that is inside the imagination, to draw up a memory and to actually do it while you're in front of the camera. And that sometimes gets lost because we start to enter sort of like the actual like mind of the performer. So sometimes that kind of direction is ephemeral and lost, but you actually encourage it and articulate it in class. And I want you to actually remember, I want you to actually think about that.
Well, that's right. And they'll talk about it. I mean, we'll do it as a prelude, you know, or I'll go, okay, stop. This isn't, let's make this richer. I think of this scene we used to do for the showcase, and someone says, oh, I want to go to this school so much. There's a magic in here. You can feel it the minute you walk in the door. And I always go, what are you talking about? Oh, well, you know, I just know I'd like to study here. Well, you know, it's like, you know, too general. Let's be specific. When did you last feel magic? And then you get them talking and they're like, oh, well, yeah, I played trombone, or yeah, we had a concert. And do you remember those moments before, you know, it started or before the curtain opened. Oh yeah. Well, was that magic? You know, is an empty theater magic? Is your name in lights in a fantasy magic? You know, what is it that says this place is going to get me there? It makes all the difference. They've then had to make a specific choice. They brought their own personality to it. I have a lot of my students write real life behavior. And I've known a couple of teachers of mine and directors that have encouraged improv. I don't know if you've experienced this, but if you catch yourself improvising in a situation, you're almost always behaving naturally. You know, you're looking for words, you're searching, you're focused, you're not. If you watch your animation, there's usually more going on, and then suddenly someone gets them in a scene and they think they have to be rigid. And I know about distractions, believe me. Years I taught actors that had to bounce. I was like, can you bend your knees? Can you unlock? Please don't bounce. But I think real behavior comes, I think acting comes naturally if you know what you're doing, if you know what you want. I don't know how hard you work, Davi, about emotional prep. And that's something else we can talk about. But I think actors in general, not just young actors, everyone wants to feel, right? They want to be connected. They want to use their emotions. So I hear a lot, how should I feel here? Or what am I feeling? And, you know, that's like, well, what are you doing? You know, that comes back to, you're not paid to come on camera and feel an emotion. You're paid to, you know, illuminate a story of some kind, flesh out a character, a relationship. And if you do a good job, chances are they'll write to you, you know, they'll embellish your role, or at least pay attention for the next thing you get to do.
In spite of all of the preparation, in spite of everything that is in the mind and all the homework that's done, asking questions, in spite of all of the improvisation before a scene begins, in order to sort of get ready and to feel sort of natural going into it, at the end of the day, it seems like the technique that you consistently remind us is always to come back to the playability of the action at hand, the strategy of what you're doing moment to moment. And as long as there's something that you're actually trying to do, then you're always there and rooted in the present, and everything can sort of support it.
That's right? What I say. You know, you come in to do something. If you're successful at it, you'll be happy or thrilled or proud or vain. If you're butting heads with somebody, again, that comes down to trying to figure out more specifically, really one thing you want. I've heard objective, super objective, just what do you want? I want her to like me, you know. Sometimes that's hard for characters to see because they're baffling in the words. I'm like, yeah, but that's because he really likes her. You know, I do. But even if it's something more, I want you to believe me. I want you to accept my apology. I want you to, I mean, it can be tricky. Sometimes the objective is, I really want to end this relationship. I really do. But I don't have the guts to do it. So I'm going to keep working around it. So that I don't hurt your feelings. And, you know, if you explore the writing, I mean, I think you're a writer, a good writer. I was thinking about how you made opportunities for yourself early on. Well, you were always, you know, someone's going to ask, what was Davi like as a student? You were very exciting, and you were so smart and so. But okay, you have smart actors. You were curious about the world, and you were curious and you read. You were a voracious reader. And I thought, this is so impressive because not only do I believe in education, but I believe that actors draw on all they have. Their observational powers, their knowledge, books. I mean, you know, I read a lot of fiction, but I think there are some wonderful characterizations in there. And in the world we're living in now, I think there's almost no excuse not to be, you know, investigating, at least online, some of the things you're playing, some of the, I don't know, I'm sure you had some doctor instructions when you had good sense.
Yeah, I literally met with the plastic surgeon yesterday that I used as a source over the course of the show.
I mean, it was very believable, you know, and there's a case where you're set. I mean, your environment should have helped you enormously because, I mean, it had to feel very often as if you weren't acting. You were just doing a job in a situation. You know, I'm supposed to stand here. This is my job. the more actors I think can fake themselves into believing that they're not acting, the better it is. And people are surprised I say that because of some of the forethought I think you need to give to it. But you can't be thinking, what's my objective now, or what's my relation. You just have to listen. But if you've done your work, I think it's there, and then you can roll with it. Then the surprises happen. Then hopefully something you've never seen happens, and you can parry that into something exciting, right? But yeah.
The classic throwing it all away after you've all done the homework. No, but it's true, and it's not to bring it up as a cliche. It's just the idea that you ask in class. You've asked for so many different directions of going in, right? And it's not as easy as just like the objective. It's also I think you briefly mentioned it before, but it's like the strategy, and that's where the choice comes from. Good choices.
Yeah.
Like how am I going? The how, right? The playability of the how.
Yeah.
And then once you prepare that and you articulate it in that cerebral way, once you're there, then it's like, then you Meisner it, then it's just like, now we're here just want to learn. But like your body kind of knows like, oh, but I'm actually doing this and I'm doing this. And actually now I'm going to throw that away because I'm here with you, but you did that. And so it's encouraging.
A lot of that too is in the plot. I'll have somebody say, well, let's see, I'm thinking of a girl who's trying to seduce a guy to say, we've had a little sexual exchange. Now I want to be your girlfriend. And he wants to break up with her. So right away, and most guys don't choose that, but I'm like, oh, we're going to do that. Oh no, it's hard. And they're studying together. And, I say, okay, so you want him to like you. What do you offer him, or what are you doing? And she goes, well, I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to say, I like him. I'm like, okay, but he's doing work. So what do you have to do first? I have to get his attention. Good. How are you going to do that? I don't know. Well, does he think you're attractive? Did you have a nice little romantic moment? Okay, so how can you flirt with him? And then the behavior comes, then there's the head on the shoulder, then there's the playing with his hair, and then for the other guy, from the other standpoint of the character is like, I got to break up with this girl. What's the obstacle? Oh my God, she's really attractive. And maybe I don't have to do it today. Maybe I can wait. Or I'm going to, or maybe my frustration will take the better of me. And I'll end up, saying, get your hand off my arm or something. So, but a lot of that will be in the script. And in fact, I think it's sometimes you see something and you don't recognize the value of it. And it's that old story, you write and you're just looking for the actor that will bring your story to life, that will make it work. And I'm still surprised. I do a lot of, I have so much material. I have new material and ancient material. I have material that hasn't come out yet because someone's auditioning for something. But it never, say a scene that I really like as a teaching scene. I'm always thrilled when an actor does something I've never thought of before. When they surprise me with an interpretation, I'm like, that's so great. I'm happy to lead you, but you came up with that on you, and you have to know how great that is. You have to know that that's very good work. And I have
originality and individual, and that's also what sets one apart when casting is watching literally 50 tapes, different actors. From now, also the camp is open with self-taping, right? So they're watching tapes from Los Angeles, New York. Sometimes they open it to Europe and Australia, New Zealand, and so
I think it's here to stay. And I think, I think I was thinking about that because I thought, it's not that I want you to do something odd or too cutesy, but I come back to behavior and I think, are you a vain character? Is this a scene that should have movement, but we can't because we're on Zoom? So am I talking to you, but am I really catching, are you one of those actors that always kind of looks for a place to check your reflection in a window? Or, is it something smaller? Is it just that you do something with, you've seen people do behavior with glasses or they just, there are things that people do. And, sometimes in the whole body work of it, you have more options than you do in a close-up, of course. But I think, I don't know, do you find that you feel rigidly focused in a close-up on your auditions? Do you try to alter what your mind is doing, so to speak, and where you are?
I find that when you have the close up, then you really could just like surrender to your thoughts and your feelings, and you don't have to do anything. And I'm always telling myself, like, you don't have to do anything
Yeah.
except be like sort of in the moment. And of course, that's like the two sided of like, what does that even mean to not do anything? It just means like your literal reaction and the fact that you've already prepared to understand what the circumstances are means that all you have to do is sort of just flow with the reactions. And if it's that close,
I was thinking of how you took the reaction to your breakup in the Good Sam. And I took some stills, but I thought it was so full and it was so rich. And I thought, okay, he's probably, of course, he's prepared. So I'm always curious how you prepare for a moment like that. I mean, did you have much time before that scene, or did they film you with something else and then went right to it? Because that's where I think it's a little challenging. That's where it's challenging. That's where I concede that an actor has to know how to kind of dig their, turn it up, so to speak, get it mixing up, and you don't have a rehearsal to build to that necessarily. So, some actors use music, some actors go into a private space and think about something. I was usually of the opinion that if you didn't have to go to a personal moment, let's say cry, for example, is it a death of someone else that you love? As effective as that can be to get you in a mood, I've always been hesitant to suggest that actors take themselves out of the situation of the script. I think if you have to start a scene, action, tears are flowing, okay, you can get there, whatever it means, go for it. But if you're in the middle of a scene and then, I think it's better if you, I use all kinds of, it's as if this, or it's what if, but I like to tune into the actor's individual vulnerability. What makes you go over that edge? What makes you fall off the cliff to that emotional roller coaster? Why? Is it because you're not loved? Is it because you're always alone? Is it because no one will ever love you? Is it, it's this thing we say to ourselves sometimes, and almost everyone has it. When things go bad, we say, oh no, or I can't, or why me, and those can be, I think, the key, the crux to figuring out what makes us lose it. Because honestly, I have to remind my students that, so want to cry, I want to cry. I cried at home in rehearsal. I'm like, I know. Nobody wants to cry. We do everything we can not to cry. So from that vantage point, you flip it around. You say, no, I'm not going to cry. And that thing, holds your diaphragm in and cramps your chest, and the inability to breathe, and that redness that comes, that's all because you're going to go off the edge and expose yourself and be vulnerable and let it out. And we are impressed with actors who are vulnerable to crying. I know people get cast with that, and I've seen scenes where, if not the first audition, the callback is the crying scene, the big emotional outburst. But I think there are ways not to be freaked out by it. Let's put it that way. There are ways to remember that it's just another process that we do in real life. What's the real life behavior? What happens to us? And can we use some of our own vulnerability in the situation of the character?
What has led from being freaked out about it, because honestly, it used to freak me out as well, because it just felt like it was an externality that you had to reach independent of how you got there. So I thought it felt always like writers wanted, it was just like a gimmick or a trick, and then you cry. And then the first step for me was like, let's return to the story. Well, like, why, what has led them to feel this much? And when you start to explore that journey, you start to find all of these reasons that circumstantially does elicit that kind of response. And then, as you say too, sometimes it's not just about the circumstances, it's about your personal humanity and how it interacts with it. And if those two can really blend together, then you're committed to the story. And then you're fully committed, physiologically committed to the story.
Well, think what you had to do with that freak out scene and tell me a story. I mean, I still remember that scene. I mean, I couldn't break it into bits for you, but I went, oh, wow, that was great work, Davi. But, again, I think he was crying. If not, he was certainly freaked out in what you'd seen and what you were, and yet you had all this exposition you had to get, it's like, I've done plays like that where, well, I think of Shakespeare as like, just kill her already. But I played Constance in King John, and, she's wailing and her son has died. And, 100 lines later, she's still cursing somebody. But it's, yeah, there are times the emotion has to be there and you have to technically control it enough to be understood and all of that and the lighting and, but I like your idea of the humanity because yes, there's a reason why somebody thought this character had to lose it here or had to be vulnerable. And it can be the hardest actor. It can be the one, in fact, some of the most effective performances. Do you remember, have you ever seen a movie called 5 Easy Pieces?
No.
It's a Jack
5
Nicholson.
Easy. Yeah.
5 Easy Pieces. It's got a famous scene in a coffee shop. People talk about it. It's Jack Nicholson. A lot of it is dated. Well, no comment. It didn't hold up as well as I wanted, but there's a very famous scene with Jack Nicholson and his father at the end. And I'm pretty sure if it didn't win awards, that's why he got a lot of attention, because you're not expecting the vulnerability that he brings to that scene. And, I can think of a number of roles where characters were asked to face the unfaceable. I think of Clute, Jane Fonda. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but yeah.
To face the unfaceable. Yeah. And to
Sounds
find
like
that when one is
dream, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's it could be a little trepidatious sometimes to approach it, but then that means that there's something there. If you have a fear of actually approaching it, it's because there's something there.
Yeah. I had a very valuable class in the classics, or the academy, where I was getting professional speech and voice training to help with the breath on crying. And I remember thinking, oh, this is kind of a cheat, but she was of the opinion that characters we all breathed differently. But how we inhaled, how we exhaled, just various things about how we held ourselves. I was like, that's like everybody walks differently. You're spending a lot of time sort of looking at yourself, what I call taking your own pulse. But that was interesting because it helped me realize again that we're looking for the physicality of something. But then how you get there. I mean, I don't know if you do much sensory recall. I've found that very helpful sometimes, also very kind of freaky. But it is the case that when you remember when an event stands out in your past, very often it's because of some of those seemingly extraneous things that make you remember them, whether it was the sound of broken glass or a smell of rain or whatever it is, and that transports you back to that memory. And I think that's important to remember when people need to fill that in. I don't know if I said this, but I read an article one time and the actors had used this, and I've taken her ideas, but it was people, places, things, and events. And the idea was on your script, make a choice. When you talk about Uncle David, who could that be? Or you remember when we went to the lake, if you've got a lake, you can fill in, that might give you that slight believability that you're talking about something real, right? Same thing with, a cherished object. I'll do an object exercise in my class. And as much as anything, it's about what do you kind of getting to know you, what are you going to bring in and talk about? And so I find all kinds of interesting things, but I say, something you can hold and then why it's significant. And this idea of endowing, a place or an object means that, think about how we endow our relationships. I mean, we give them a lot of value for a particular reason, but it's not just the scene. It's, when I met you, you did that really cute thing with the ice cream cone or, whatever it is. And then, those little details come back because now you don't give me ice cream anymore. You have You have reasons that you can add.
The significance, I think, is absolutely key. And it goes back to what you said before, and we kind of laughed about it in faking yourself out, which is perhaps a crude way of putting it. But faking yourself out is rooted in one's ability to actually believe in any of the details. And the only way you believe in any of the details is if it has a personal significance. So the moment you smell something and it matters to you, your mind immediately says, oh, this matters to me. And so if it just happens to be in the context of the scene, well, then beautiful. We just blended those worlds together. And which was why I opened this session saying that you taught me something very important. Well, many things, but it's that richness of being able to play between like being at your desk and coming up with something, being in your mind and your heart and coming up with something, and then being present and then just listening to the person. And of course, being on camera for the first time, because personally, that was also coming out of like performing arts middle school, performing arts high school, having many different classes, vocal tech and production and scene study, but then also sitting there and like watching myself back in like my first close up and then seeing what was happening and how things translated or didn't, or trying something in my mind and seeing how it worked also like really piqued my ability to see and invest in that style of work, which sometimes is overlooked. So I thought it's so critical and pivotal to see that. And I can't even believe that in the 70s that was already happening. I can only imagine what kind of cameras you had in that room.
Oh my God. You know, I remember the whole idea of reel to reel. I remember this was very short period of time, but they had reels and you would stick it in the machine like a giant, you know, cassette tape and wind the thing around. You know, I got started because you talked about coming to New York. Right away, I discovered I couldn't make any money. I did off Broadway, but mostly off, and it didn't pay. And I had really fun but bizarre part-time jobs. And I started. I somehow. Oh, I think I'd done a play. The casting director saw. Long story short, her friend was starting some acting classes and I should credit, Meisner was an adult school that had started in the 50s for on-camera acting training. Anyway, she said, you know, they want me to maybe start something for kids. I need actors to come in and work with the children. And I went, oh, I'd love to. I like improv. I'm not great at it, but I enjoy it. And I don't get to see myself. So I would go to auditions for commercials and they would probably say, tone it down. And I'd be like, huh? Anyway. So it was very instructive, but I enjoyed it and I did it for a while and they loved me. And she was a wonderful writer and she got a gig to go for a summer to Eugene O'Neill Theater Festival in Connecticut. And she said, would I cover her class? And I said, yes. And before I knew it, I was asked to take over the program. And I said I would if I could still act and if I could do my own thing. And that I only wanted to do teenagers. At the time, I didn't want to do anyone younger than 13. That was the start. you know, all of the confidence of the young, I can do this. You learn about your own acting, of course, as you're teaching it. But I knew that I'd seen the adult curriculum and I actually eventually found its basis in public speaking. And I thought what they were teaching for a commercial cell made sense, but I wanted it to be a little more organic, a little more like slice of life kind of thing. Real people ads were coming in and actors had to compete with Mrs. Jones from Peoria, Illinois. So how do you relax? But I also didn't just want to do commercials or at that time soap operas. I wanted to do musical theater and speech and voice. And I had a lot of connections in the business. So little by little, I said, I'm not just the West-Barron teen division, because I wrote my own curriculum. In fact, I even wrote a text. So I said, okay, I've got to incorporate. So that's when Act Teen started. And I think at one time I had probably over 30 courses. I had Alexander technique, I had dialects, I had voiceover. I mean, so many various movement things and Shakespeare anyway. And a very good group of teachers who were expert at their field. And I like to think at the time I could get them because there wasn't a lot of competition. They might be running a speech and voice program at NYU or something, but then in the summer they were off. So sure, they'd come and teach for the right money. And oh my gosh, it was fabulous to see the hum of activity and really, lasted for quite a long time. Eventually, I did discover that I was sad when my teenagers went away, and I said, well, you can't change the name, Rita Litton, and have more or less now operated for all ages. And due to COVID, probably a little more on Zoom. On that order, though, I'll be back in the classroom, but I think Zoom is very helpful for the self-tape process. I mean, I think I've been a reader with actors who are self-taping themselves with their phones or their cameras, but I think this box, Zoom allows you to tape it and send it to them. And I think the more you get used to that, I haven't found it as difficult as I thought. I had some trepidation. How am I going to do scenes? How am I going to hand you something and you're going to take it? Can we get up because everyone sits too much? And can we move around and hit marks? But when it comes down to the close-up, it's been very helpful. And I think it's actually made a huge difference in some of my students recently getting work. So it's worked well. And
Because
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. What were you going to say?
And then I think I told you, it allows me to work with people all over the country. I had a student in Ireland, I had one in the Philippines, God bless her. I think she'd get up in the middle of the night to take my class, and China, all in the same class, but instead of just the tri-state area, which is typically what happens when I'm in New York. And I do monologues. I think you knew that, but I've always enjoyed that special. What can I say? It's unreal. The situation of monologues is a loaded deck. It's like, oh, come in and show us everything you can do. And it used to be in 2 to 2.5 minutes. Now it's like in 1 minute.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I think some schools I hear have finally given up their pre-qualifying tape. But so, I have a huge library, so that's good. I can give the unusual. But I got work when I was a young actress with my monologues, and it was something that I knew eventually how to work the system. And I think there's a lot young actors do to kind of cripple themselves, unfortunately, typically in choice of material, but then in lots of little extraneous things they don't even know they're doing. So because I've done a lot of classical work anyway, I enjoy that. I've had great success on that. And somehow people find me, which is fun.
Yes. And the library, as you said, the library helps because monologue is it's a technique of also just imagining what the other person is saying, responding to them as if it's happening for the first time, discovering those moments, and also having the help. I remember being in high school and having to pick a monologue. And it's like, okay, first of all, I have to recall either every play I've ever seen for that one scene, or I have to dive into endless playbooks and look for materials. So it's really wonderful.
And in the collections, everybody has the same thing. And,
the horrible collections where,
or I picked the ones where I was in the play, and that was almost never right because I'd run around the stage like I was still in the play. I used to do Helena for Midsummer Night's Dream, and I finally went, they don't know what you're doing. They can't see, what was going on. You learn what not to do, like how to get out gracefully.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many times though I've worked with students on how to announce their pieces. The simple thing of
the framework of the piece.
Well, and because among other things, if you're doing a general or you're going into a live audition, you can get the reverb of the room. You can have a moment to announce yourself and go, oh, my voice is going. Oh, my voice is really dead in here. You can get a sense of the distance and, I'm going to be only, 8 feet in front of you. Okay. Or, oh, I'm up on that stage and I got to go up the steps while you're watching me.
It's a moment to calibrate, right?
Do you know, I thought of something else you said about come in and do it. When I coach an actor for an audition, self-tapes are a little different because ultimately you have to send that in. But there's a possibility of a callback. There's a possibility of getting an adjustment. I throw a lot at actors. So I throw less at less professional. In other words, if an actor is working and getting auditions, I offer them perhaps more choices. I don't want to spin your head too much. But I do find that it's helpful to have alternative approaches. In other words, I can't tell you how many times actors say, oh, I want to write that down. And, okay, write down general things, but please don't write down that that line has to be said a certain way, or even necessarily that there's going to be a pause there. Consistency, yes and no. I think the fresher it looks and the more I can look at your performance and then go, okay, try this and you will do it and you'll change. That's so important. I wasn't always able to do that as a young actor. I didn't realize at the time how quickly I could set a performance, even in something like a monologue. So I stay loose in case you get a huge adjustment, that you know how to do that. And that's helped a great deal, both in getting my initial students callbacks and then getting them to book. Because the director can see, well, you've heard this, the director can see, oh, this is really good, but with my input, it will be brilliant.
And then just be ready to just change that, even if it ends up getting changed back. That was the thing too. Then you start to learn that certain casting directors and directors will give direction just to see if you can take it. They don't even want it.
Yes.
So, but then there might be that challenge of like, wait, that direction doesn't make any sense to the story. I don't know if I can do that. It's like, that's actually not what it's about. It's just for you to do.
Yeah, very well said. That's exactly right. It shouldn't be a mind game, but yeah, I mean, what did I do? I had some director one time, I was doing some raucous comedy thing, and he said, I want you to sit down and I want you to do it as though you're looking at your reflection in the river or the lake or whatever. And I thought, and I changed it, but I must have looked like I thought he was crazy. I don't know. It was probably the first time that had happened to me. And I remember thinking, okay, you didn't pass that test, but just, someone says do it chewing an apple or, whatever it is. Okay. The best answer is okay, or I'll try, it's the ones that go, I don't know if I can do that. Why would I cast you when I can cast the person who will try?
Yes.
And the thing is, it's like accidents. I think of you as probably a perfectionist. You may disagree, but I think a lot of actors really strive. There's always more you can do, right? But what I tell my students is, don't be so freaked out about mistakes. Because mistakes aren't planned, right? So the most spontaneous thing of your whole audition might be your mistake. So once you remember that, it's like, oh, screw it. My shoulders just probably went like that. And if I'm not going to get more uptight about it, I was like, oh shit. That's a great story. There was a woman who played Ado Annie in the original Oklahoma. I think her name was Celeste Holmes. Did I tell you this story? And she's auditioning, right, for probably Richard Rodgers or Rodgers and Hammerstein. I mean, it was a huge thing. She's in a Broadway theater and she's very tall like me. And according to her story, she gets her music and she's called in and she walks up the steps, because she has to walk up the steps to the stage, and her foot catches on the top step and she goes down. And she says, she's like me. She says, I went down like a redwood. And she said, well, it was the best audition I ever did. She said, because after that, what could possibly be worse? That's like Julia Child dropping the chicken. It's just, it happens. And if you roll with it, people respect that your, set is falling down around my ears. The show goes on.
Yeah, so, the show goes on and it gives it energy. It's the fundamental rule of improv too. You just have to yes and the experience. Whatever just happened, all right, that just happened.
That's right.
We're moving forward.
That's great.
No one likes to see the tension of the performer, right? Or them losing it's uncomfortable for everyone. So the ability to just have that attitude, and remembering too, I mean, we prepare in private with our coaches behind closed doors, but at the end of the day, it's a collaboration when we show up to work.
Yeah.
So that ability to be kind of free and to learn and then team up is so critical to what we do.
That's why I'm sometimes envious of coaches that I hear that go on sets and things. And I think the majority I'm thinking of have actually worked with kids that are probably younger than 12. But I think, my job is to get you ready, and if the director is any kind of director at all, he'll be willing to work with you. I do know that generally, I think directors prefer to cast the actor that's it. You're the character. Oh, I got you. Okay, moving on. They're not going to teach you acting, but they, I don't know always that I agree with having not a personal coach, but an onset coach. Have you been in circumstances where you've seen onset coaches, and has that worked successfully?
The more adult work that I've done, no. There was in the beginning of the superhero TV show, there was like an onset coach for the first 2 weeks. And I think it was just to get everyone in a flow.
Yeah.
But then they went away. But I would be a little bit nervous about it's like having another chef in the kitchen. If the director is telling you something and the coach is telling you something, and then you have your own impression about something.
I agree. I find that a little disheartening. Sometimes people call me to coach them for a monologue class they're going to do with another teacher. And I went, really? I can, but I think that's what you're paying that person to work with you on. And I think you can get yourself confused. It's like the old story of, well, I did this in front of my mother, or I did this in front of my roommate, and he thinks, and I'm like, how long has he been teaching?
Yeah. Yes.
I try not to go, why would you do that? But it can be defeating, I think, because particularly in the wrong mouth, it can be, well, why did you do that? Or, they're seeing an external, and if they don't always know the circumstances too, I think it can be not helpful. It can make an actor lose confidence, which is probably why my husband never saw me act until it was opening night. After that, it was fine. But
when it was ready.
Do you have some people that are hard for you to act in front of? We're sure you're.
Oh, yeah. I think whenever you're not in a circumstance that is like the ready performance time, I have to like tell myself that okay, it's okay that this is under these circumstances, that this isn't a ready piece, because when you're a perfectionist, it's like I like to prepare something and then here it is. Unless we're really just clowning around, but that like middle ground but fortunately too, people stopped asking once upon a time, you're like, oh yeah, I'm an actor. And they're like, oh, do something. Can you do an impersonation? How about a monologue? In this train right now?
I know, no, I can't.
Yeah.
How about, at least you could say, have I seen you in anything? You could say, well, turn in on such and such a night. But yes, it's not like, well, that's why I used to call the monologues your party pieces, because it felt like someone was going to ask you to get up and do it sometime.
I've done it before, but then it's kind of, you're at a cocktail party, someone's like, can you do a monologue? And you're like, I'll do some Shakespeare for you. And then there's nothing, it's kind of cool to pull out a little bit of Shakespeare at a cocktail party is not bad. It's not so bad.
It's pretty classy. You go to classier cocktail parties than I do.
I doubt that, Rita.
Have you ever done a Shakespeare?
Have I done? God, it was like in high school, like when I was part of the Shakespeare at the NYU Shakespeare Youth Ensemble. But now I would love, being at this stage of my career in my life, I would absolutely love to do it.
Oh, I was just thinking, someone was talking about some of the Shakespeare. I did the first 2 years of a theater company in Madison, Wisconsin, of all places, but it was Fashion on Stratford, Ontario. But it's so exciting. And at one point we were doing rotating reps, so you do one show at night and a different one at a matinee. At some point you might have 7 plays going in repertory, and that was great. I love that. But yes, because talk about acting without a net. You almost never have anything. You don't have any props. You may have a sword if you're, depending on who you are, but you have hopefully a gorgeous costume, but not, you have to think your circumstances and your situation on a bare stage. It's all the stuff you have to fill in your mind's eye, which I guess in some cases you don't have to. I'm just trying to think. I saw at least one version of the Scottish play that took place in a back kitchen with cleavers and chef hats and everything. And I remember thinking, oh, that cold steel, that works really well. But have you seen the most recent film that they did?
Macbeth?
Yes. Did you see
I haven't. Thanks for bringing that up, because I do want to.
I think you might like it. I'm looking here about getting my screen notices. Don't show me again. It's blocking me. I was very intrigued because reading any of the history plays, and technically that's one of the tragedies, but being able to imagine the accents and who's coming back from battle and who's fighting whom, and they do a lot with the feeling of the Scottish moors in the fog. And particularly, there's one actor who plays the witch is, and I won't say much more, but it's very, I think some of the interpretation you would find intriguing. Plus
Oh,
it's short. I think you should get it. Oh yeah, it's Shakespeare's shortest play in general, I think.
Oh.
But I think, and so much happens right away. I mean, the murder, and then, but I think it runs, I think it goes quickly. And Denzel is very interesting, and Frances McDormand wouldn't be your main choice, but she's interesting.
So really, she's really great.
I mean, she can't be bad, but yeah, I liked it a lot.
I'll be checking it out. Rita, thank you for also spending this time talking to us and sharing your sage advice. And everyone can also continue to follow you. You have your website, you're also your private coaching,
right.
You have your Zoom classes right now. And I'm excited to hear that you might be going physical soon as well. I'll return to the classroom, but in the meantime, you are accessible. We'll make sure that all the information is available. And it's always a joy to speak to you. Thank you for being one of my mentors and for also shaping the artist I am today. I wouldn't have done it without you, so thank you.
Thank you, Davi. This was a pleasure. Let's talk again soon.